I arrived in Vatican City after dusk, when the tourist crowds had thinned and the cobblestones echoed only with the steps of guards and priests. The walls rose above me like a fortress, ancient and silent, and for the first time in years, I felt as though I had entered a place where rules outweighed chaos. My name is Adrian Moretti. I'd been a police officer in Rome for over a decade. I'd seen crime, anger, the routine ugliness of the streets. But after years of improvisation and paperwork, I was tired. When the sealed letter arrived on my doorstep, summoning me to the Vatican for an interview at midnight, I sensed that my life was about to change. The Swiss guard at Porta Sant'Anna examined the letter, glanced at me once, and waved me through. He did not ask questions. Inside the walls, the air was different, cooler, perfumed faintly with incense. A young guard led me down a narrow passage and into a chamber that resembled a sacristy stripped bare. A table, a lamp, and a crucifix on the wall. Nothing more. Waiting there was an old man in a plain cassock. He had the bearing of someone who had long ago grown accustomed to secrecy. His face was pale, his eyes sharp with study, his hands folded neatly on the table. When he rose, his back bent slightly, but his voice carried strength. "Monsignor Varela," he said, introducing himself, "this is not an interview, it is a discernment." He slid a folder across the table. Its seal was already broken. Inside lay a document thicker than any contract I had ever signed. It did not describe duties or salary. It demanded silence. I must not speak of what I saw, not even to family. I must never write outside approved notebooks. I must never remove objects, even by mistake. At the bottom of the page were the words, "Breach of this covenant endangers lives." I signed. Varela rested his palm over my name as if sealing it. "You served the living on the streets," he said. "Now you will guard the space between worlds." He led me out of the chamber into corridors hidden from visitors. The walls were stone, the air thick with age. Pipes rattled faintly above our heads. Finally, we came to a small chapel behind an iron gate. On its altar rested a leather folder, dark and heavy. "Protocols obscura," Varela said. "Older than you, older than this city. Rules with no author, only survivors." He opened it. Inside were pages of vellum covered in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and other alphabets I could not name. Modern translations filled the margins. He ordered me to read. "Never seek the face of what seeks yours. Keep your eyes to the ground or the hands. Announce yourself before you cross a threshold. Wait for reply. Maintain distance, 2 arms length at all times. Speak only when spoken to, and answer with the fewest words required to be true. Count arrivals, count departures. Keep the number as you keep your breath. Refuse gifts. If your name is called by voice, give only your given name. If silence calls, do not answer. If the air turns cold, pray until your pulse is steady. If metal burns without fire, stay where you are. Distance protects. Do not turn your back on more than one at a time." My voice trembled as I read. When I finished, Varela closed the folder. "These are not suggestions," he said. "They are architecture. Obey them, and the roof holds. Break them, and the storm enters." He guided me deeper into the passageways. At one door he paused, listening before choosing a key. Inside was a bare room with a clock ticking on the wall, and 2 lines of tape marked on the floor. "Stand at the first line," he ordered. I obeyed. "Announce yourself." "Security watch," I said. "My name is Adrian Moretti. I am present." "Now cross to the second line. Announce again. Count your breath with the clock." I did. At first I felt foolish. Then my body settled into rhythm, 30 ticks, steady and calm. "The line is not tape," Varela said quietly. "It is within you. Remember this." He showed me a cupboard stocked with flashlight, batteries, a radio, and a plain notebook. These tools are humble because humility travels far. The flashlight announces without words. The radio binds you to me. The notebook keeps your mind honest. Write only what you see, not what you imagine. He asked if I prayed. I told him I had, but never to bargain. "Good," he said. "Prayer's not bargaining. It is attention." We climbed a stair and entered the basilica itself. The vast space loomed in darkness, marble floors glinting faintly. Varela stopped beside a worn patch of stone where countless feet had paused. "Do you hear what the stone says?" he asked. I listened. At first only my own pulse, then, faintly, the echo of footsteps long past. "I hear patience," I said. "That will serve," he replied. Finally, before the altar, he turned to me. "Speak your name, and one true thing about it." "My mother chose it for sound," I said. "My father said it means man of the sea. I do not love the sea, but I have learned to stand on the shore without wishing to flee." He nodded, satisfied. Then he charged me. "You will guard the thresholds when pilgrims sleep. You will measure distance. You will count without fail. You will not let fear leave your chest. You will hold your tongue until words are required, and then you will speak with economy. Do you accept?" "I accept." He placed my hand on the leather cover of the folder and made me repeat the rules. When I finished, the chapel air felt warmer by a breath. "The work has accepted you," he said. "Tomorrow night you begin." He handed me a badge, a schedule, and instructions. "Wear shoes that do not shine. Bring nothing that glitters. Memorize the code. Burn the paper." At the gate, the guard nodded at me as though expecting my return. Outside, Rome was ordinary again, but I felt changed. I walked the streets and found myself counting steps, measuring distances, whispering my name into silence. For the first time in years, I believed that rules might not only restrain me, they might save me. The next night arrived with the sound of bells muffled by distance. I reported at the central office, received my radio and notebook, and walked the assigned route through corridors already half darkened. Midnight was near. The basilica seemed to breathe differently at that hour, as though the stones themselves prepared for something they had hosted many times before. I followed the routine Varela had drilled into me, heels steady, eyes to the ground, count my breaths against the ticks of the clock inside my chest. I reached the northern ambulatory and positioned myself near the carved columns. The marble glowed faintly under lamps reduced to dim halos. Silence pressed close, heavier than any silence I had ever known. At exactly 12, I heard the doors open at the far end of the nave, not loudly, but with a solemn weight, like pages of an enormous book turning themselves. The air shifted, bringing with it a scent both metallic and sweet, as if blood and incense had mingled. My pulse leapt, but I remembered the first rule. I kept my gaze lowered to the floor. Footsteps echoed across the marble. Some were firm, boots striking in measured cadence. Others slid or shuffled, whispering like cloth dragged over stone. I saw shoes polished like mirrors, sandals bound by strips of fabric, bare feet with nails clicking faintly. Once, in the corner of my vision, I caught the shimmer of scales. My instinct pushed me to look higher, to glimpse the faces of those passing by. But the rule burned in my memory. Never seek the face that seeks yours. I forced my eyes down. "Announce," I reminded myself. My throat felt dry, but I spoke. "Security watch. Adrian Moretti present." Most did not respond. A few voices murmured replies in tongues I did not recognize. The words curled strangely in the air, heavy with rhythm, like fragments of ancient prayers. I felt the language press against my ears without offering meaning. One figure paused longer than the others. Its feet were bare, but too long, each toe jointed twice. They stood within the permitted distance, waiting. My breath stumbled. For an instant, curiosity almost overwhelmed me. If I raised my head even slightly, I might learn what kind of being owned those impossible feet. My neck tensed, but I gripped the notebook in my pocket and forced myself still. 2 arm lengths. Count. 1, 2, 3. The figure moved on, my lungs released. The arrivals continued for nearly 10 minutes. I counted them all. 23. At the 23rd, silence fell again. The doors closed by themselves, their echo carried deep into the basilica. I remained at my post, listening. Beyond the great doors, muffled voices began to rise, layered and broken, chanting in unearthly rhythm. Some tones rumbled like stone grinding, others trembled high, like glass vibrating under a bough. The air grew colder. My breath formed a faint mist. I whispered a prayer under my breath, not a bargain, only attention. Pater Noster, qui es in caelus. The rhythm of the words steadied me, and the mist thinned as my pulse slowed. At intervals, I walked my patrol, as instructed. Each threshold I crossed, I announced myself. Each time I heard only silence or a murmur that felt like acknowledgement. Once, near the side chapel, the scent of iron grew strong. I thought I heard movement, a shift of robes against stone, but when I announced, no reply came. I held my ground, repeated the count, and the presence passed. Halfway through the vigil, my discipline nearly failed me. I heard a voice, clear and distinct, speaking Italian near the western transept. "Adrian," it said, with the casual tone of an old friend. I froze. The rules returned to me. If your name is called by voice, give only your given name. If silence calls, answer nothing. "Adrian," it said again, softer, coaxing. Against every instinct, I nearly lifted my eyes, ready to seek the source, but my training clamped down. I answered with one word. "Adrian." My voice echoed back from the pillars, and then the sound receded. No more was said. At 4 a.m, the chants ended. The doors opened once more. The pilgrims departed in silence. Their footsteps echoed, a reverse procession. I counted as they passed, 23 again. The number matched, balance held. One figure lingered near my station. Its feet were scaled, glistening faintly in the dim light. It paused, not moving. My throat tightened. Then, without my prompting, a voice rose from above my head, resonant and low. "Custos fidelis," it said. The words were Latin, old and solemn, the faithful guard. I dared not answer. I held my breath, lowered my gaze, and waited. The scaled feet moved away, vanishing into the darkness toward the outer doors. When the last echo faded, the air of the basilica seemed to lighten as if a great weight had lifted. I resumed my patrol, counted each corridor once more, and found nothing unusual. By dawn, Monsignor Varela arrived with a small cup of coffee. He asked for my report. I spoke carefully, noting every number, every sound, every scent. He listened without comment until I repeated the final words. "Custos fidelis." At that, he closed his eyes and nodded. "Then the work has begun," he said. Outside, Rome was stirring awake. Vendors opened their stalls, sweeping away dust. To them, the night had been ordinary. But for me, it had been the first vigil, and the rules had held. The second vigil did not begin as mine alone. When I reported to the central office, Monsignor Varela introduced me to another guard, younger than me, perhaps 25. His uniform was crisp, his shoes polished bright, his expression one of easy confidence. "This is Luca Ferraro," Varela said. "He will accompany you for tonight's watch." Luca extended his hand with a grin that belonged more to a casual cafe than the basilica at midnight. "Glad to meet you," he said. His grip was firm, almost challenging. As we walked toward the northern corridors, he leaned close. "I've read the packet," he whispered. "Those rules. Come on, they treat us like children. Eyes on the floor, count the feet. It's theater." His tone unsettled me. I remembered my own first night, the weight of unseen eyes, the whisper in Latin. I warned him quietly. "The rules exist because without them, you do not last. Trust me. Hold your gaze low. Announce yourself. Count. It's not theater. It's survival." He laughed under his breath. "Survival from what? Wealthy pilgrims in costume. The church loves its rituals." Midnight came. The basilica stirred again with its strange life. Doors opened, and the metallic scent returned, sharper tonight, mingled with the sweetness of burning wax. Footsteps entered, measured, shuffling, gliding. I announced my presence. "Security watch, Adrian Moretti, present." My voice carried across the marble. Beside me, Luca hesitated. Then, almost mockingly, he spoke. "Ferraro, present." His tone lacked the steadiness of ritual. The procession passed. I lowered my eyes to the ground, counted sandals, boots, scales, bare nails. 21, 22, 23. But Luca shifted, restless. Out of the corner of my vision, I saw his head lift. He was looking directly at one of them. "Don't," I hissed, but the warning came too late. The figure paused. Its feet were pale, almost translucent, veins like dark threads beneath skin. It stopped only a meter away. I held my breath, eyes fixed on the ground. Silence stretched. Then Luca gasped. I glanced sideways just long enough to see his face. His eyes were wide, pupils blown open, mouth slack. He whispered something, a half-syllable, before his body locked rigid. The notebook slipped from his hand. He stood staring upward, as if caught by a force beyond sight. The figure moved on. Its steps made no sound, as though it floated. Luca remained frozen. His chest heaved shallowly. I grabbed his arm, whispered his name, but his eyes were empty. Not unconscious, worse. He was awake, but hollow. Count, I told myself. My hand shook, but I forced the numbers. 24, 25, 26. The procession ended, the doors closed, balance restored, but Luca did not return. I guided him back to the bench in the side corridor. He followed like a sleepwalker. His lips moved, muttering fragments that made no sense. Light inside, too many faces, no end. I shook him, but nothing changed. His pupils reflected the dim lamp without recognition. When dawn came, Varela appeared. He looked at Luca once, then at me. He looked, I said simply. My voice broke. The Monsignor placed 2 fingers on Luca's forehead, whispered in Latin. No response. He closed his eyes. The mind cannot always return, he said softly. He will live, but not as before. I felt sickness rise in my throat. So the rules are not superstition, Varela finished. They are boundaries between life and dissolution. You see now why obedience is everything. Together, we led Luca out of the basilica. His feet moved, but his gaze remained locked on nothing. He murmured like a child dreaming through fever. That day, I did not sleep. The vision of his eyes stayed with me, hollow, unseeing, like windows broken open to a storm. I understood then that the rules were not chains. They were walls. Behind them lay survival. Beyond them lay ruin. And I vowed never again to question them, nor to allow another under my watch to treat them lightly. After the night of Luca's undoing, I carried a new weight into every vigil. Fear had sharpened into discipline. Each step, each breath, each announcement now felt less like ritual and more like survival. Yet as weeks passed, I began to notice that the danger was not confined to the visitors alone. The basilica itself seemed to shift when the gatherings occurred, as if the stones had grown aware of the company they hosted. The first sign appeared in the northern transept. During ordinary days, the stained glass windows stood silent, filtering sunlight into colored mosaics across the floor. But on one midnight, as the procession entered, the glass came alive with a pale blue glow. No moon shone outside, no lamps burned behind the panes, yet the glass bled light from within itself, tracing fractured patterns over the marble. I wrote it down in my notebook, each line precise. Blue illumination from inner glass, no natural source. Another night, I patrolled the western nave and passed the statue of Saint Veronica. The stone face usually carried an expression of sorrow carved centuries ago. But that evening, droplets formed at the corners of her eyes. They trickled down her cheeks, not water from condensation, but tears that glistened like oil. I wanted to touch them, to confirm their substance, but the rules whispered, "Do not cross the distance unless required." I recorded it instead. Statue weeping, tears thick, reflective, odor faintly metallic. The strangest disturbance came with the elevator in the archives wing. The old lift usually required a key and a heavy pull to awaken. Yet, on the 3rd vigil of the month, I heard it clatter alive. The cage descended empty, stopped at the corridor where I stood, and lingered with its gate open, humming faintly as if waiting for a passenger. I announced myself, voice steady. "Security watch, Adrian Moretti, present." The hum ceased. The gate closed of its own accord, and the lift returned upward with no one inside. Notebook entry. Elevator movement untriggered, behaved as if summoned by unseen hand. Night after night, I filled the pages of my notebook. My handwriting grew sharper, as though precision could defend me. I numbered the entries, cross-referenced the hours, and marked the positions of every phenomenon. I wrote not as a guard, but as a witness, building a record for those who might doubt. Each description read like the log of a naturalist cataloging creatures in a foreign wilderness, except the wilderness was stone and shadow, and the creatures were disturbances in reality itself. Varela reviewed the notes once a week. He never mocked my precision. He never told me to write less. He read each line, nodded, and sometimes added a single mark in the margin, as if to confirm that my eyes had not deceived me. One evening, after I reported the glowing windows and the weeping statue, he closed the notebook slowly and spoke. "You are learning to see what the stones already know," he said. I asked him if the city itself was alive. "Alive?" He shook his head gently. "Not as you are alive, but the city bends. When heaven and hell negotiate under its roof, the fabric of walls and glass cannot remain still. Matter remembers the weight of spirits. The basilica becomes both stage and witness." His words chilled me more than the cold air in the corridors. If the building itself bowed under the gatherings, what chance did I have to remain unchanged? That night, I sat in the side chamber with my notebook open. I wrote longer than usual, not only describing events but reflecting on them. My entries became less like reports and more like confessions. The glass breathes, the stone bleeds, the lift obeys commands no human voice gives. Am I cataloging miracles or documenting intrusions? Still, I followed the rules. My eyes stayed lowered, my announcement steady, my count precise. The rules did not forbid writing. They encouraged it, for without record, madness might become memory. As dawn approached after one of these altered nights, I paused by the main altar. The marble reflected my own shadow faintly, stretched and bent by the early light. For an instant, I thought the shadow was not mine at all, but another standing beside me. I counted aloud, firm as ever. 1. Only 1. My voice anchored me. Later, when I reported to Varela, I told him what I had seen. He did not dismiss it. Instead, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "The boundary between your shadow and another's grows thin during these nights. Remember this. The rules protect you not only from them, but from yourself. Obey them, and you will not dissolve into echoes." That phrase, "dissolve into echoes," haunted me. My notebook soon carried not only descriptions, but also questions. Could stone remember? Could light carry intention? Could a statue cry for reasons unknown to its sculptor? And if the building bent, was I bending too? Varela never gave answers, only the same solemn reminder. The city itself bends when heaven and hell negotiate. Do not mistake bending for breaking. Our task is to keep the roof from falling. With each vigil, I felt the truth of his words. The basilica was no longer architecture alone. It was an organism stretched between two worlds, straining but enduring. And I, its watchman, was both parasite and protector, tasked with counting, recording, obeying, so that negotiations beyond my comprehension could continue without destroying the ground beneath my feet. The night of the special gathering arrived beneath heavy clouds. The air tasted of iron before I even crossed Porta Sant'Anna. My steps echoed strangely, as though the stones beneath me anticipated weight greater than mine. At the central office, Monsignor Varela handed me my badge, flashlight, and notebook with more ceremony than usual. "Tonight we'll test the rules," he said. 3 delegations will attend. Hold your ground. Do not interfere." I nodded, though my throat had tightened. By midnight, the basilica had been hollowed of ordinary silence. Instead, it carried a pressure, as if the vast arches bent under something unseen. I took my station at the northern corridor, announcing myself as always. "Security watch. Adrian Moretti, present." The first arrivals came with a rustle like dry leaves dragged over marble. Their feet were wrapped in black cloth, leaving faint smudges as they passed. I counted 12. My notebook later recorded their name, the Order of Ash. Their steps faltered now and then, as if their bodies carried both weight and absence. The second delegation moved with unnerving unity. Sandals bound in leather, each pair identical, striking the floor with exact rhythm. They whispered as they walked, voices overlapping in harsh syllables, fragments of scripture twisted into strange cadences. These were the children of Ezekiel, and they numbered 9. The last group entered later than the rest, their presence announced by the clicking of scaled feet. The scaled choir. I had heard them before, but never so many together. 15 pairs, claws scraping, scales glinting faintly in the dim light. A scent like seawater and burning copper filled the air as they passed. 3 groups, 3 counts. I wrote them down quickly, the numbers steadying my pulse. For an hour, muffled voices bled from behind the great doors of the nave. The rhythm was not like prayer this time. It was argument. Words rose, collided, fell into silence, then surged again. My pen scratched notes, tone heated, voices overlapping, distinct rhythms, chant, whisper, hiss. Then, without warning, the basilica itself seemed to shudder. Windows rattled, statues moaned faintly as though their marble throats had learned to breathe. I gripped my notebook tighter. The voices inside the hall broke into a roar. One language clashed against another, human syllables warping into sounds no mouth should shape. Something struck the doors from within. Dust trickled down the hinges. My instinct screamed at me to run, but the rules commanded stillness. Count, announce, hold the line. Suddenly, the air split with a bell, deep, solemn, undeniable. The sound poured down from the dome of St. Peter's itself. I froze. No hands touched those ropes at night, yet the bell tolled as though the city were being warned of fire. Each strike shook my ribs, turned my bones into resonators. The doors opened a fraction, light spilling out, not candlelight but a glow too white to be natural. Varela appeared at my side, though I had not heard him approach. His face was grave. "Code 7, he said. His voice held no tremor, but the words carried weight like a sentence handed down. "What does it mean?" I whispered. He answered without turning his head. "A disagreement resolved without destruction. But until it resolves, you do not move." The bell continued to toll. From inside I heard shrieks, hisses, broken chanting. My eyes remained locked on the marble floor, but my imagination painted what I dared not look upon, wings colliding with scaled limbs, ash scattering across the air, scripture turned into weapons. My breath grew ragged. I whispered to myself, "Count, count." I marked each toll of the bell, 1, 2, 3, 12. At the 13th strike, silence fell inside the nave. Then the doors closed gently, as if nothing had happened. The bell ceased. The basilica exhaled, and the air lightened again. Varela turned to me. His hand rested on my shoulder. "You heard the bell. That is the city itself, intervening. When men cannot resolve, the stones call heaven's notice. Tonight, the notice was enough." I swallowed hard. "And if it is not enough?" He did not answer. His silence was answer enough. By dawn, the delegations departed. Their footsteps were slower, less measured, but they counted true. 12, 9, 15. None missing. I wrote each number with relief so fierce it nearly bent my pen. When the last scaled feet vanished into the shadows, Varela finally spoke again. "Remember this night, Adrian. Rules hold the line, but when the line quakes, even the bells cry out." I nodded, notebook heavy in my hand, ears still ringing with the toll that had come from no human hand. The vigil after the Code 7 incident began in uneasy calm. The basilica felt bruised, as though the marble itself still remembered the weight of argument. I walked my circuit, notebook ready, counting each echo, announcing at every threshold. The rules steadied me, but I knew that the balance we had preserved was fragile. It was during the second hour, near the sacristy of the Pietà, that I first heard it. A slow rhythm, polished heels striking marble with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to command. The sound was unlike the shuffling robes of the Order of Ash or the hissing claws of the choir. It was precise, arrogant, metallic in resonance. When the figure came into view, I saw shoes of silver leather, polished so perfectly they seemed to catch light even in the dark. The steps halted directly before me. I kept my eyes lowered, fixed on the mirror sheen of those shoes. They gleamed like coins newly minted. "Guard," the voice said, smooth, almost musical. "Your discipline is noted," I announced as required, my tone steady. "Security watch. Adrian Moretti, present." The figure chuckled softly. "Names are powerful. Adrian Moretti, man of the sea. You have served faithfully, and so you have drawn attention. Do you know whose?" I did not answer. The rule was clear. Speak only when spoken to. Answer with the least words required to be true. "Do you tire of silence?" the voice pressed. "Do you not hunger to lift your eyes and see what walks beside you? Knowledge withheld is a chain. I can break it for you." The silver shoes shifted closer, their reflection rippling across the marble floor. "I can give you more than obedience," the voice continued. "Power, influence, the wisdom hidden from men. You would be more than a guard counting feet. You could command, you could know. Does this not tempt you?" My throat tightened. Every instinct urged me to ask, to look, to reach. But I remembered Luca's empty stare, the way his mind had been stolen for a single glance. The rules held me in place. I breathed, steadying my heart. The figure persisted. "Think carefully, Adrian. What has your church given you? Long hours in silence, a pittance of coin, fear as constant companion. I can give you freedom. I can triple your pay, lift the veil, grant you a seat at the table rather than a post at the door." My pulse quickened. I thought of the years in uniform, the exhaustion of bureaucracy, the sense of being a cog in a machine too vast to notice me. The voice touched those nerves like a skilled physician pressing on an old wound. And then, like a light within memory, words rose unbidden. The scripture my mother once whispered when she feared I was straying. "What does it profit a man to gain the world, yet forfeit his soul?" I spoke them aloud, my voice firmer than I expected. Silence followed. The silver shoes stilled. For a moment, I thought the figure might strike. Instead, the voice laughed softly, though without joy. "Quoting your book," it said. "How quaint. But perhaps that is why you were chosen. Few refuse when silver is offered." The shoes retreated a step, then another. "Very well. Remain faithful to your rules, little Custos. We will see if they guard you when greater storms arrive." The footsteps moved away, their echo fading into the basilica's cavernous dark. I exhaled only when the silence returned fully. My hands trembled, but my notebook remained steady enough to record. Encounter. Silver shoes. Voice offered knowledge and reward. Temptation refused. When dawn came, I delivered my report to Varela. He listened without interruption. When I recited the scripture I had spoken, his eyes closed briefly, and he crossed himself. "You resisted," he said. "That makes you visible to them in ways you were not before. They test those who may matter. They tempted Judas with silver. You turned it aside. That marks you." "Marks me for what?" I asked. "For notice," he replied. "For danger, and perhaps for purpose. Custos fidelis, Adrian, the faithful guard. You have spoken the words that bind you more deeply than any oath I could give." His hand rested on my shoulder. "You will find the nights grow darker, but you will also find that some eyes, even among them, now watch you with respect." I walked out into the streets of Rome as morning light struck the dome. Vendors shouted, scooters rattled, the city lived as if nothing had occurred. Yet inside, I carried the echo of silver steps, the gleam of shoes that had tried to claim me, and I knew I had crossed a threshold more dangerous than any corridor. The rules had held. The scripture had steadied me. And in that refusal, I sensed that my role was no longer simply to survive. I had become part of the story the basilica itself was writing in stone and shadow. The vigils after the silver shoes felt different. I carried the memory of temptation like a scar beneath the skin, and perhaps the others sensed it. When the visitors passed me in the dim corridors, a few began to acknowledge my announcements with more than silence. Some inclined their heads slightly, a gesture so small it might have been missed by anyone else. Yet I saw it, and it chilled me. Respect, or recognition, from creatures that obeyed no earthly law. One night, as the Order of Ash drifted past, their leader slowed his pace. His feet were wrapped in blackened cloth, ash crumbling faintly with every step. He paused, tilting his head just enough for the shadow of a bough. Then, he moved on without a word. My notebook entry was simple. Order acknowledged with gesture. Unprecedented. Another vigil. A member of the scaled choir lingered as I announced myself. Its claws clicked against the marble. Then, deliberately, it drew one taloned foot back and lowered its head fractionally, scales catching the lamplight. A boo. My pulse pounded, but I responded only with the rule. Security watch, Adrian Moretti, present. Before recording the incident, even the children of Ezekiel, who chanted more than they spoke, shifted their rhythm when I passed. Their sandals struck the stone in patterns that echoed my own footsteps, as if marking me into their cadence. The respect unsettled me. Respect implied expectation, and expectation was heavier than fear. When I brought these reports to Varela, he studied them with furrowed brow. Finally, he closed the notebook and spoke with a gravity I had not heard before. "They are testing you," he said, "and finding you steady. That steadiness is rare. Even among the priesthood, few hold to rules when shadows press. You are becoming more than a guard." I frowned. "Then what am I?" He gestured for me to follow. We walked through passages I had never been shown, down into the deeper levels beneath the basilica. The air grew colder, walls thick with age. At last, we entered a chamber lined with ancient maps, parchments sealed under glass, diagrams of circles intersecting like constellations. "This," Varela said, his hand sweeping across the maps, "is the board." I stepped closer. The diagrams showed not territories of land, but domains marked with symbols, crosses, flames, serpents, wings. "The Vatican," he continued, "is a board of negotiation, a table where forces older than nations come to speak, angels, demons, and the powers that stand between. They meet here because the city is layered with centuries of faith and blood. It holds neutrality in its very stones, and we, the custodians, ensure that neutrality endures." My mouth was dry. "So this is not just security, this is balance," he finished. "You stand between heaven and hell, between ancient covenants and new disputes. Without you, without the rules, the board collapses. And when the board collapses, war spills into the streets. Not war of men, Adrian. War of powers that see men as dust." I thought of Luca, empty-eyed after one glance. I thought of the bell of St. Peter tolling without hands. I thought of the silver shoes offering me knowledge in exchange for loyalty, all the fragments aligned into a single truth. "I am not just watching doors," I whispered. "I am the door." Varela's eyes softened, though his voice remained stern. "You are the threshold, the cypress planted at the border of the field. The cypress does not command the field, but without it the border dissolves, and then all is trampled." The chamber seemed to close around me, heavy with maps and symbols. My heart pounded with a mixture of dread and strange pride. I had wanted order. Now I understood the cost of holding it. That night, during my patrol, the basilica's silence felt different, less oppressive, more deliberate, as if it acknowledged me. When the visitors passed, their bows no longer felt accidental. They marked me as part of the balance, a living piece on the board. I kept my eyes lowered, my voice steady, my count precise. But inside, something had shifted. I was no longer guarding for survival alone. I was holding a line drawn by centuries, a line the world above never saw. And as I wrote in my notebook that dawn, one sentence stood alone beneath the numbered entries: "I am the hinge of the covenant between heaven and shadow." The vigils had settled into rhythm again. The Order of Ash, the Children of Ezekiel, the Scaled Choir, each group arriving and departing under rule, each argument contained within stone walls. I had begun to believe that discipline alone could hold them forever. But then came the night of the breach. It began with silence that was wrong. The corridors always carried some echo, the scrape of a sandal, the rustle of cloth, even the hush of unseen breath. That night, the air swallowed every sound. My footsteps felt muffled, as if I were walking on dust instead of marble. At midnight, the doors opened. I counted arrivals: 10, 16, 20, familiar. I wrote each number, steady. The great hall filled with their voices, chant, hiss, whisper. All was routine, until I heard something else, not steps, not voices. A slither across the wall itself, like ink spreading over parchment. The lamps dimmed, one by one, as though shadow itself had chosen to walk. Then I saw them. Shapes moving without feet, darker than the dark around them. They bore no sandals, no claws, no marks of passage. They were unmarked. My heart seized. They did not belong to the covenant. One of them slipped across the corridor in front of me. Where it passed, the marble blackened for an instant, then returned to normal. I announced myself, voice cracking. "Security watch, Adrian Moretti, present." No reply. Only silence that mocked. Another shadow split from the wall and advanced. My hand reached instinctively for the pistol at my belt. Then I remembered Varella's warning. Weapons of iron are useless against those without flesh. The rules offered no guidance for this. But something deeper stirred. Psalm 91. Words my grandmother had whispered when storms rattled our windows. I drew a breath and spoke aloud, voice shaking at first, then stronger. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. The shadow halted. Its form rippled, uncertain. I stepped forward one pace, keeping the distance, and declared again, I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In Him will I trust. The corridor vibrated. The lamps flickered, then flared brighter. The shadow recoiled, hissing without sound, folding back into the wall. Others emerged, drawn by the defiance. 3, 5, 7. They surrounded me, their outlines shifting like smoke in wind. My pulse hammered, but the words flowed now with force beyond me. Surely He shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler, and from the noisome pestilence. The unmarked writhed, their forms distorted, twisting in refusal. I pressed on. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day. The marble beneath my feet glowed faintly. The shadows shrieked without sound, fragments scattering like ash in wind. One by one they dissolved, fleeing back into cracks between stones. When silence returned, it was true silence again. Breathing, echo, the heartbeat of the basilica. My notebook trembled in my hands as I wrote, Intrusion, the unmarked, repelled by Psalm 91. At dawn, Varela found me pale and unsteady. I recounted the night. His expression darkened. They were not permitted, he said. They breached the covenant. They sought to unravel it. Why me? I asked. Why did words hold them? He placed his hand upon my shoulder, firm. Because faith is the weapon they cannot counterfeit. They bear no marks because they recognize no order. But the name you spoke, the psalm you declared, is order itself. It is covenant written into breath. I closed my eyes. The memory of shadows pressing close lingered, the sense of helplessness, until the words gave shape to courage. That morning, as light spilled across the dome, I understood what discipline alone could not teach. The flashlight, the radio, the notebook, tools for structure. But when structure broke, only faith remained, and faith was enough. For the first time, I believed not only that the rules could save me, but that the words of Scripture were shield and sword. The unmarked would return. I knew it. But I also knew what my grandmother had known when storms howled outside her door, that sometimes the voice raised in trust is stronger than any weapon drawn in fear. That night, in my notebook, I wrote one line beneath the records of numbers and times. It was not a report, it was a vow. Faith is the only weapon. After the night of the breach, I thought I understood the depth of my duty. Faith had proven itself stronger than fear, Scripture heavier than steel. But Monsignor Varela was not finished with my initiation. 3 nights later, after the visitors had departed without incident, he appeared at my post. His lantern burned low, casting shadows that seemed deliberate, as if guiding the way. Come, he said, it is time you saw where the rules were born. We descended through passages I had never walked before. Stone stairs spiraled downward, the air cooling with each step. The walls narrowed, carved not for pilgrims, but for keepers. At the lowest landing, a gate of iron awaited, etched with words in Latin I recognized. Non nobis, Domine, non nobis. Not to us, Lord, not to us. Varela unlocked the gate. Inside stretched the crypt, vaulted chambers where sarcophagi lined the walls and marble saints kept silent watch. The air was thick with centuries, dust and incense mingled into permanence. At the heart of the crypt stood a single pedestal, and upon it rested a book bound in cracked leather, dark as dried blood. Its clasp was bronze, green with age. The weight of it pressed the chamber like a hidden heart. The Codex Malachi, Varela said, his voice a whisper, though no one else could hear. Few are permitted even to glimpse it. Tonight, you are one. I stepped closer. The cover bore no title, only a sigil like intertwined wings and thorns. My hand trembled, but Varela gestured for me to open it. The leather moaned faintly as I broke the clasp. Inside were pages of vellum, the script so dense it seemed alive. Columns of Latin, Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, even alphabets I could not name. Interspersed between them were rules, familiar words but written as commandments, each illuminated by hand in red ink. I read aloud, "Never seek the face that seeks yours. Announce yourself at thresholds. Maintain distance. Speak little. Count all." The very rules I'd been given, but here they stood not as procedures. They stood as scripture. Varela's voice was grave. "The rules are not invention. They are revelation. This codex was compiled long before you or I, long before Rome became empire. Prophets wrote them down, scribes preserved them, monks guarded them through fire and plague. They are survival clothed in prayer, an unspoken gospel for those who walk between humanity and what is not human." I felt my chest tighten. "Then every patrol I walk, every announcement I make, is liturgy," he finished, "unseen by the world above, but sacred nonetheless. You are not simply a guard, Adrian. You are a lector of the hidden gospel, a keeper of the covenant." I turned the pages. Some passages were unfamiliar, rules beyond those I had been taught. Do not answer when silence names you. Do not accept the coin that shines without shadow. If fire burns cold, step backward, but do not flee. Each line was precise, austere, unyielding. I realized then that the book was less a codex than a covenant, a binding agreement scratched into parchment by centuries of survival. One page in particular drew my eyes. Its margin bore a note in faded ink, "Custos Fidelis," the faithful guard. My throat tightened, the same words I had heard whispered above my head on that first vigil. "They knew of me," I said quietly. "They knew of your kind," Varela replied. "Each generation one or two emerge who can bear the weight. You were tested and you endured. That makes you part of the line, stretching back to Malachi himself." I closed the codex gently, as though afraid to wake something sleeping inside it. My hands shook. "So my role is not to fight battles," Varela said, "not to strike with steel or even to win arguments. Your role is to keep covenant, to hold the threshold steady, to remind heaven and hell alike that there is still one who keeps count, who speaks the name properly, who obeys the rules without breaking. That obedience is more powerful than any sword." I thought of Luca's empty stare, of the silver shoes gleaming in darkness, of shadows dissolving before Psalm 91. And I understood. The rules were not superstition. They were scripture disguised as instruction, gospel written for those who walk where others would be unmade. By obeying them, I was not only saving myself. I was upholding the boundary that allowed humanity to survive while greater powers negotiated unseen. When we left the crypt, dawn was near. The streets of Rome lay above us, unaware. Tourists would file through the basilica soon, gazing at mosaics, photographing statues, speaking in hushed awe. None would guess that beneath their feet lay a codex that kept their world from fracture. As we emerged, Varela stopped me at the threshold. "Adrian," he said, "do not mistake humility for insignificance. A single hinge holds a great door, and you are that hinge now." I walked into the light with those words pressing into me like armor. I was no longer merely a watchman of corridors. I was keeper of covenant, lector of the hidden gospel. And for the first time, I bowed my head not in fear, but in reverence. By the beginning of my 5th year, the nights no longer felt like borrowed time. They had become my life's measure, each vigil another bead on a rosary strung not with prayers but with rules. The notebook I carried was heavier than its weight suggested, filled with thousands of entries, numbers, descriptions, phenomena, and fragments of scripture written in the margins when fear demanded a companion. One morning, after a particularly calm vigil, Monsignor Varela summoned me to his office. His hands trembled more than before, his hair now almost entirely white. On the desk lay a sealed envelope stamped with the insignia of the Secretariat. "You have been chosen," he said simply. Inside, the letter named me Custodian Majoris, Senior Overseer of the Hidden Watch. The responsibility would extend beyond the basilica. I would train others, establish protocols in cathedrals across Europe, and ensure that the covenant remained unbroken wherever the gathering spread. "You are no longer one guard among many," Varela said. "You are the keeper of keepers." The words settled on me like a mantle of stone. I accepted, because to refuse would have been to deny everything the last years had carved into me. From that day, my nights altered. I still patrolled corridors, still announced myself at thresholds, still counted with the same precision. But I also stood before new recruits, placing the protocols obscura in their hands, making them read the rules aloud 3 times until their voices shook less. I taught them how to count not only footsteps, but the rhythm of silence, how to resist when shadows whispered their names, how to let discipline become armor. The rules spread. What had once been whispered in a single basilica now reached to Milan, Paris, Vienna. Each diocese built its own small chamber of the watch. Each chose men and women capable of obedience without pride. I saw the structure grow, quiet as roots beneath soil, binding the church with a network of thresholds no outsider could imagine. The visitors noticed. During one vigil, as the delegations departed, a figure from the scaled choir paused near me. Its talons clicked, and from the darkness above its scaled feet, a voice drifted down, low and steady. "You are the hinge of the covenant." I bowed my head, saying nothing, for no response was required. But inside, the words reverberated like a tolling bell. A hinge is small, almost invisible. Yet without it, the door falls. That night, I wrote the phrase in my notebook, underlined once, then again. Hinge of the covenant. The months passed into years. Conflicts rose and were contained. Code 7 incidents occurred rarely, each one resolved without spilling into the streets above. Ordinary Rome lived in ignorance, its people laughing in piazzas, drinking coffee at dawn, never knowing how near the precipice lay. And that was the point. Our work was to keep peace invisible, to let the world believe in ordinary mornings. On the anniversary of my appointment, I sat alone in the northern transept before the start of another vigil. My notebook lay open. I began to write not only reports, but reflection. I have learned that peace is not forged in treaties signed by daylight. It is kept in the shadows by those willing to obey rules no one else will ever read. We are not heroes, nor saints. We are watchers. The rules restrain us. But in restraint there is strength. By silence, the noise of war is held back. By counting, chaos is measured. By obedience, existence continues. I paused, listening. Footsteps had not yet begun. The basilica was still. Yet in the stillness, I felt the weight of countless vigils behind me and the promise of countless more ahead. I knew then that this was not a task that ended with retirement. It was a calling that clung like shadow, unshakable until death. Closing the notebook, I whispered the words aloud as if to fix them in the stones. Sometimes the world is kept at peace not by warriors, but by custodians who follow rules no one else believes in. The doors stirred. Midnight approached. I rose, steadied my breath, and took my place at the threshold. The eternal watch continued.